Hey listeners, did you know this episode of med-surg Moments is eligible for CE credit? After you listen to the episode, you may claim 0.5 CE hours by following these easy steps. First, log into the AMSN online library at www.library.amsn.org. Then complete the evaluation for the podcast episode and submit to earn your certificate. The Academy of Medical Surgical Nurses is accredited as a provider of nursing continuing professional development by the American Nurses Credentialing Center's Commission on Accreditation. There are no relevant financial relationships with ineligible companies for anyone with the ability to control the content of this episode to disclose. Enjoy the episode.
This episode of med-surg Moments is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice.
On this episode of med-surg Moments,
with us today is healthcare law expert Rachel Giles.
Can you walk us through the types of legal liability nurses might face?
Criminal liability does happen in some cases. Vicarious liability is going to be the one that gets you the most. So a vicarious liability is that...
What are the most common types of claims against nurses?
The biggest ones are failure.
I was so excited that you were coming on because I'm not even a new nurse and I am struggling with this on a daily basis.
The caution that I stress with AI is sometimes...
Talk about confidentiality and privacy violations and social media, because that's also very...
What would you say are the most important next steps nurses can take if they do find themselves at the focus of a legal liability allegation?
How can we as nurses protect ourselves from legal liability?
If a nurse was facing an allegation, would you recommend that they hire their own attorney beyond what the hospital's legal counsel provides?
This is Mary Tess,
Sam,
Eric,
Marcella,
Kelly,
and Sydney. Welcome to med-surg Moments, the AMSN podcast.
This podcast is an engaging look at the lives of and surrounding medical surgical nurses.
We're proud med-surg nurses just like you, sharing our stories, insights, and experiences to support you in your nursing journey. Imagine it's 6:45 a.m. You're handing off 6 patients after a chaotic night, and a single missed reassessment note suddenly becomes the centerpiece of a fall, a chart audit, and the dreaded call from risk management.
Legal liability is every healthcare provider's worst nightmare, and it's not always just the docs in the hot seat. As nurses, we can also find ourselves under the microscope of legal liability.
It's important for every nurse to understand all aspects of nursing legal liability. That's why we're bringing this special episode to you.
With us today is healthcare law expert Rachel Giles. Rachel has over a decade of experience in health law, compliance, federal regulations, and risk management. She is the CEO of Giles Mediation, LLC, where she assists low socioeconomic status clients mediate cases in an attempt to stay out of a long, costly court battle. Additionally, her tenure in senior roles at multiple healthcare organizations within the Texas Medical Center in Houston highlights her skill in mitigating risks, conducting audits, and driving quality and patient safety improvement initiatives. Rachel, welcome to med-surg Moments.
Thank you so much, and it is great to be here.
I am very excited. I'm looking forward to learn. Rachel, can you walk us through the types of legal liability nurses might face?
So there's a couple different elements when it comes to civil lawsuits or civil liability. Nurses are going to face a lot of different things when they are working. So our civil liability, those are our negligence, malpractice suits. Those are the things that are going to come at you for a death or something that negligently happened to a patient or a family member. And so they have those abilities to sue you, whether you're a nurse, a hospital, a healthcare organization, or even a physician. But in the terms of a nurse, vicarious liability is going to be the one that gets you the most. So a vicarious liability is that failure to supervise, failure to rescue, failure to train. The biggest one that I see for nursing is preceptor positions. So you have that supervising nurse that is precepting that nurse on the floor, whether it be a new grad or somebody coming into the healthcare organization or changing like from ICU to ED or from the ED to a med-surg floor or even changing from an ED to a different specialty for like labor and delivery. And that preceptor is now responsible for all the training that is going to go on. And so if that preceptor doesn't approve that person to move forward, then that's a good thing. That means that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and they're supervising appropriately. But if that person, say that nurse, moves forward out of that preceptorship and then something happens, then that preceptor nurse can actually be held responsible if something goes wrong later on down the road. And it leads back to a failure to train, a failure to adequately supervise that nurse coming out of that preceptorship, or even within that preceptorship, if that supervising nurse is delegating tasks to that GN or that new nurse coming out, that is something outside of their scope. So they can actually be held responsible if they're wanting that nurse to do something that is not within their scope or within their credentials. And then you have those criminal liabilities. We're all very well aware of that medication error in Tennessee that led to a criminal lawsuit. It's not fun, but it happens. Unfortunately, they're very rare, but criminal liability does happen in some cases. And then you have that professional liability. So you can end up in the hot seat with your board of nursing, whichever state that you belong to. So here in Texas, we have the Texas Board of Nursing. So we can send nurses there if we think that they are being harmful or negligent with their license.
There's such a high need for preceptors and charge nurses, and I hear them reaching out constantly, not to me because I'm float pool, but to the people I visit, that they really want to train them. And I totally understand the hesitancy because you are taking on so much more liability. And then as the charge nurse, you're taking liability for the entire unit of patients and the nurses to a certain extent. So it's a scary leap for $1 more sometimes. But I understand why the hesitancy, like you're saying, that their liability gets extended.
Absolutely. That is one of the things. And I encourage preceptors to read their Nursing Practice Act for that preceptor section, because it is going to give you the things that you need to know to be a preceptor and those things that are going to cover you liability wise.
Rachel, I almost wanted to put in a big quote whatever you said about preceptorship and all those, because we always emphasize that. I'm not exactly sure how knowledgeable preceptors are with that, with the legal liability. So really thank you for emphasizing that in this episode.
Absolutely. It is one of my forefront charges right now at my healthcare organization. We put together a very robust presentation to give our new preceptor group, and there is a very robust section in that training that now covers liability, vicarious liability, and what can lead to some issues, some negligence, and some civil liability.
What are the most common types of claims against nurses?
The biggest ones are failure to monitor or assess a patient properly that leads to a serious safety event or a serious adverse event. And then you've got your medication errors, and those occur when we're not checking properly, pulling that medication from the Pyxis. You have your lookalike medications, and you go pull that medication from the silver pouch because it looks exactly like the one next to it. And then you take that to the bedside. You're just scanning away because you're in a hurry and you've got to give 10, 15 medications to 5 different patients on that med-surg floor. And you're just rushing to try and get all those meds taken care of and all of those glucose checks and everything. And you're just rushing through it, and you miss that you just gave the patient morphine when it was actually for the next patient, but you gave it to the wrong one because you weren't checking right, or you weren't slowing down, you weren't taking the time to check that. And then that led to an adverse event because that patient is allergic to morphine, and you just gave that patient not only a narcotic and a controlled substance, you just gave him something that he was allergic to. And so that happens with those most common claims. And then you've got your failure to communicate important information. You miss that lactic acid or that really, really important lab to that attending. Now your sepsis BPA is firing and you miss that communication with that attending or that advanced practice provider. And then your failure to document. That is the biggest issue that comes across. If you didn't document it, it didn't happen. And I can assure you that these claims that go to court, they're not going to come at you next month. They're not going to come at you at the end of the year. They're going to wait. Their statute of limitations, so that's going to be 2 years down the road. And then by the time you get to disposition, that's going to be 5 years away from the event, maybe 10 years. If it's a pediatric patient, they have 20 years to get that claim in. Documentation is the biggest thing that you see with legal claims with nursing. And then, of course, those patient falls, when you don't have all those fall precautions in place, or you document that you do, but they're really not, that's a big one that leads to injury.
Okay. You mentioned the D word, the big D word, documentation. It is my kryptonite of nursing. I love being at the bedside. I love being everybody's favorite nurse, but does it show it in the chart? I was so excited that you were coming on because I'm not even a new nurse and I am struggling with this on a daily basis. As flow pool, it's like I'm on the unit for the first time all the time. And I know the ideal is at the bedside, at the point of care. If you could please tell me how I can improve at this, because I always find myself at the end of the shift trying to catch up. And that's how you miss the stuff that might haunt you 2, 5, 10 years later.
I always stress that documentation should be accurate and timely and objective. Nothing subjective should ever go in the chart. It should never be anything that is an opinion. And so when you have documentation, and I can assure you, I've had those shifts in the emergency room where I am running and running and running, and I don't have time to stop and document, let alone go drink water or eat anything. And I kept a notepad in my pocket. I would document certain things here and there, and then I would shred those at the end of the shift. But I got to a point to where I had to force myself to stop and take 5 minutes to document and just throw in a real quick nursing note. Patient is alert and oriented, basic, simple stuff, and then go back later and fill in all of those flow sheets and the LDAs and your assessments and all of that. But I always kept a little notebook and I kept it in my pocket, and I would just have my patient's initials and I would write down the important stuff. Now, whether your hospital allows you to keep that or they want you to document throughout the day, I would take time to document throughout the day, but I know that in some cases that's not always possible. I've been there. I've done the 16-hour shifts and I'm running from start to finish. And so I completely understand that. But we have to make sure that we document, because if we don't document, then it means that it didn't happen, because you can't prove that it actually happened if there's nothing in the chart that says that it's there. And then the biggest thing with that is your communication with physicians. You got to make sure that you actually put that communication inside the chart. So Epic, for example, you have Epic Chat, and it is amazing communication between providers. But Epic Chat does not stay. It is only in there for 28 days. It does not save. So any of those QMP communications that you send to your provider and they send that note back, you need to make sure that you go put in that little nurse's note saying QMP communication, such and such MD, new orders, verbal orders, request this, whatever it was. Throw in that quick nurse's note or progress note just to make sure that that documentation is actually in that chart.
Thank you for that. I really did think if they ever need to look at this, they can pull this up whenever they want to. Question about AI and the future, flow sheets. Some people are allowed to make a macro pre-fill, and time-wise, it sounds awesome. Tell me some of the pros and cons on that.
So there are pros and cons to that. In the organization that I currently am employed with, we do have AI and smart phrases already pre-programmed into our Epic. However, the caution that I stress with AI is sometimes it will read through the chart and give you a note that isn't what matches the patient. It will add words. So if for any reason it had labs that matched what a septic patient would have, it might throw in this patient is septic, but the patient isn't septic. They don't have a sepsis diagnosis. They don't have the certain pieces that go with that. And so one issue is when it goes to that coder, that patient's going to be coded for sepsis and get charged for sepsis, and then it's going to be permanently in their medical record when that patient was never septic. And then you're also having a note that is incorrect because that patient is not septic and you didn't proofread it before you hit submit. Yes, it's a great time saver and it's going to give you time back with your patients on the floor and at bedside, but you have to make sure that you read through that and make sure that there's no felonious words in there or any falsified data that accidentally got added in or whatnot. So we just have to be really careful with that.
I love how you described it, how human knowledge and critical thinking is so important. A couple of years ago, we did an episode about if we want to invent something, what would it be? And I specifically thought of that documentation and somebody listened to us and then it gets recorded. And now we have that. We have ambient AI, but it's true. It hallucinates. That's the right word. So talk about confidentiality and privacy violations and social media, because that's also very popular nowadays.
We're going to pause for a quick moment to tell you about a special AMSN membership offer just for you through the end of this month.
Hey, med-surg Moments listeners.
We have an exclusive offer for you.
When you join AMSN by December 31st, 2025, using the code AMSNPOD,
You will receive $5 off your membership.
Visit amsn.org/join and be sure to enter AMSN POD when you check out.
Okay, we're back.
So talk about confidentiality and privacy violations and social media, because that's also very popular nowadays.
Oh, absolutely. That comes across my desk very often. For confidentiality and privacy, big thing is HIPAA and high tech, of course. Your HIPAA is your PHI. You leave it around. You've got stickers stuck to your scrubs. You've got stickers stuck to your vital sign machines because it's easy access. Those are Joint Commission and DNV's favorite things to find when they come to a survey, and we don't like them. But another issue that's come up on the part of AI, any of y'all have those really nice Meta AI glasses?
I actually do have 2 of them.
You probably love them and you probably use them every day. Well, guess what? Those are not allowed in hospitals.
Correct.
And we have actually come across quite a few nurses that are wearing them while doing patient care. And so we have to remind them that those are glasses that record and you're violating HIPAA when you wear those. And so it's just one thing you got to remember. I know that nowadays we are just loving technology and it is making everything easy for us. But you also have to remember that that's one of those things that we can't have because it's violating those patients' rights and that HIPAA compliance.
Speaking of surveillance and cameras, you reminded me of so much that has changed since COVID. So at my last hospital, they ended up putting in a camera in every single patient room of the entire hospital. And we got so used to that. When I left, we were still doing that. Is that here to stay? What do you think about that in case of legal issues that come up with that?
So it actually depends on your organization. There are cameras in every single room, and now we have cameras in the OR that actually record the surgeries that go on. The cameras in patient rooms, they are utilized for a couple of different things. You've got telepsych, so you've got that camera that's going to watch that patient to make sure that they're not going to harm themselves. You can use that as a telesitter, to where if you have a patient that might need one-on-one or more observation to prevent that fall, they have that ability to watch that camera because that person sits behind a monitor and watches a couple different rooms at a time if it's on. And then when it's not on, it puts that black box over the patient so you can't see them. But we have added that into our admission consent. So when you are consenting to admission, you're consenting to being photographed and recorded or utilization of that camera when you sign your consent for admission. Sometimes they record and sometimes they don't, but they're a safety measure and they're a safety precaution that I think is a good thing that's in place for some of those high-risk patients. For example, our dementia patients that might not remember that they're in a hospital and they think they're at home and they're having delirium, or stroke patients who don't have a really good gait because their status post-stroke and they've just gotten TPA or TKNES and their blood's a little thin and we want to watch them a little extra because if they fall or something out of that bed, they might get a head bleed, they might get a head injury, they might break something. We want those things in place to make sure that that patient is safe, not only for the hospital, but for the patient.
Absolutely. And when it comes to safety, I absolutely love it for it. But I still have a little bit of a feeling. I think just because you sign something when you're admitted. I remember we had big signs at the front of your room. And still, when patients would realize, hey, wait a minute, is that a camera above me? Well, there's this sign right here, and you did sign this. But sometimes it wasn't a safety issue. And it made me wonder, like, well, I guess we don't have to have it on all the time. But unless the patient knew to ask to turn it off, it was going to be on. We have the avishers, so it's that rolling tower with a camera for safety, and they just are such a big help.
They really can be. They have saved quite a few patients lately with falls. Falls are increasing all over the United States. We're pushing for 0 falls and 0 harm, but unfortunately, I don't know if we'll ever get there. But we can reduce them with that telesitter, and that person that's sitting behind that monitor calls that nurse and says, hey, your patient's trying to get up. You might want to get there. Or they call that PCA. Hey, he's trying to get up. You need to run. You need to go. On the other issue of HIPAA and privacy, social media you brought up. So here's the thing with that. You got to be aware of your surroundings, not just for social media, but even in the hospital. You're in that elevator and you take that call on your Vocera cell phone or your iPhone that's for the hospital, and you're having that communication. You don't know who's standing next to you in that elevator. It might be a patient. It might be a family member. It might be another person on a different unit. But you got to be really careful about the information that you disseminate while you're out in public. And then with social media, I know the big thing right now is everybody wants to be an influencer and everybody wants to be on TikTok and social media. Most hospitals now, their marketing department has issued very strict policies regarding social media, especially on campus. So a lot of campuses do not allow social media recording or any type of recording while on campus. No photography or anything other than what would be utilized for like wound care pictures or any type of surgical recording or any type of educational recording. Those are the only recordings that you're going to find on campus in a healthcare organization, especially in those private hospital organizations where they prohibit recording or photography of anything outside of educational or healthcare plan related.
I think it's really smart for organizations to have such strict policies around all this kind of stuff because you can't really rely on common sense. It happens so much and it's mind-boggling to me. Actually, very recently in the last year, reported an employee who came across my For You page on TikTok, which I've recently broken up with, as we've discussed. What the employee had described ultimately ended in a patient demise. Can you imagine if this person's family member came across this? Like, there was enough information about the scenario that they would know. I was blown away at what information was shared. The entire badge was visible with their first and last name, our organization's name, our logo. And I was like, I can't even believe that this just came across my feed. And if I don't report it, what if somebody else doesn't? So I did. And it got deleted, and I think they deleted their whole account. But as far as I know, they're still employed, and they're probably pretty lucky in that regard. But yeah, I fully support those super strict policies because it's just silly to even think about sharing that kind of stuff. And they're just trying to get their 5 minutes of fame to become this influencer of sorts. And yeah, it was really unsettling. And so while uncomfortable, I felt like it was the right thing to do to report them, and I did.
Absolutely. That is the best thing to do. I've unfortunately been on the other end of that where I've had to terminate or be in a meeting where we terminated employees for posting on social media. I had a nurse, a surgical nurse in the OR who actually recorded a surgical procedure and then posted it on her social media platform. And it was everything laid out. She was making fun of all of the adipose tissue that was being removed from the patient and was making fun of all of the adipose tissue that was sitting on the surgical tables that had been removed. Unfortunately, she ended up going to court because the patient's family and the patient actually found her page. And so that actually led to some other litigious issues, but it's been something that you have to be very, very careful. And I really do encourage organizations to have those very strict policies.
That's so crazy because it just erodes so much trust in our profession that we are here to protect and care and do all these things. And then that just gets broken so fast.
Yeah, I can't believe someone would post something like that. You would think it's common sense. But we've covered a lot of different topics, but to put it all together, how can we as nurses protect ourselves from legal liability?
The best thing to do to protect yourselves is actually to be informed. Know your Nursing Practice Act, know your state's regulations, your healthcare laws for your state, what you can and cannot do. Report any unsafe conditions. So if you, like Samantha, reported that employee for posting on social media, just report those events and escalate. So if you don't think that you're getting what you need for the safety of yourself or even a patient, escalate it, whether it be your chain of command or outside of your chain of command, if your chain of command is not going to be the right avenue to report that. And then, of course, collaborate with your quality and risk team. They're going to be the ones that give you the best information possible to be able to protect yourselves. And they're going to be the ones that follow your events and do those investigations into those events that might happen. Document appropriately, be informed. All those things are probably the best thing to make sure that you're covered and prevent those liability issues that might come up.
All right, we have made it to our last question. What would you say are the most important next steps nurses can take if they do find themselves at the focus of a legal liability allegation?
So if you find yourself being subpoenaed for a civil lawsuit or civil liability malpractice suit or even a vicarious liability, you need to reach out to your organization's risk management and legal team or their compliance team, because if it's something that has to do with the organization, most organizations have attorneys in place for you. And so if it's at work, it's not always going to be just the nurse that's going to be sued. It's going to be the nurse. It's going to be the organization. It's going to be the physicians. And a lot of times your organization will work with the attorneys to get you removed off of that. But in the event that you are part of that lawsuit, they're going to be the ones that are going to prep you for those dispositions. They're going to be the ones doing the interviews. And if you have to go to court, they're going to be the ones that prep you for that cross-examination questions for when you're sitting in the hot seat right next to that judge and that opposing counsel is going to hammer you with questions because they're going to want you to mess up somewhere. So work with your risk team, work with your leadership team. They're going to be the ones that are going to give you the most communication and the most information if you do find yourself in that hot seat.
One quick last follow-up. If a nurse was facing an allegation, would you recommend that they hire their own attorney beyond what the hospital's legal counsel provides?
I guess it would depend on the situation. I would encourage you to talk to the organization's attorneys first. But if you don't feel like they're listening to you or you don't feel comfortable at all, you can always go and consult a different attorney. And usually in most states, consults are on the cheaper side, or even a lot of times those consults for possible representation are generally free. It depends on the attorney and it depends on the state. But if you are just completely not comfortable with that attorney for the organization, then of course, absolutely seek counsel if you feel like you need to.
Well, believe it or not, we're out of time. Rachel, this has been an eye-opener, but also incredibly helpful as we work to care for our patients while also protecting ourselves as nurses. It's been a pleasure having you on this episode of med-surg Moments.
Thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure being here.
To our listeners, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
We look forward to connecting with you on the next episode of med-surg Moments, the AMSN podcast.
In the meantime, we encourage you to subscribe to med-surg Moments wherever you listen to podcasts.
To reach us, use hashtag med-surg Moments on your social posts.
Or send us an email at amsnpod@amsn.org. That's amsnpod@amsn.org.
We are all AMSN members, and if you love med-surg Moments, we invite you to become a member of AMSN. You can learn more at www.amsn.org.
Finally, the content within the med-surg Moments podcast represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of the co-hosts and may not necessarily reflect the views, thoughts, and opinions of the Academy of Medical Surgical Nurses.
Until next time, this is Eric,
Mary Tess,
Sam,
Calais,
Marcella.
And Sydney. And always remember, med-surg Moments is a moment in our lives and a moment in our med-surg careers that makes a huge difference.